Welcome back, guys. I would love to just welcome everyone in now that we're starting in 2026. I would love to say welcome, a great start of the year. I've heard lots from our clients that we are already up and running and starting to really start up some of the strategies that we've put in place back in December. And we're really excited and want to celebrate with everyone. But before we get started, I want to just remind you that today we're doing a roundtable, which is our reoccurring roundtables that we do every Tuesday of the month on a Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And today we're going to be talking about building a resilient private label strategy and how to design private label as a margin engine and not a future problem. And it's a problem that we get quite often asked to talk about throughout some of our clients, as well as clients who are potentially want us to be part of their strategy and help them build their private label brands. But before we get started, I really want to just remind you that this is a live event as well as it's recording and we're streaming. So if you are not able to make it and you've registered, you will receive a recording. And if you are would love to get a recordings, please always do register so that you are able to receive them. And this is a roundtable and really not a presentation, so which means I'm really not here to talk at you, but really want to try to work together collaboratively. I will be asking questions, so do feel free if you're watching live to drop comments, respond. We will see them. We will respond to them as well as we go through. And we will also be following up to all the comments that are left after the recording if people are just watching a pre-recorded version of this. We've been dedicated to this for this is our third year doing roundtables, executive roundtables, with the goal to share the knowledge as well as learn from one another. So if you are considering to be part of our community and you like what you hear month over month, we do encourage you to join live with us on Zoom so that we're able to have much more fuller discussion as well on the topic. I'm going to walk us through how private label actually behaves inside a real retail business. And I will pause along the way to hear what you also have to say on your side and see what kind of feedback or whatever collaborations we could potentially also do to talk through your specific problems and needs. So if it's something that is resonates or if something that you are currently working on your private label, feel free to drop a comment and reach out. We will be here to discuss this as well. And if you are watching this live, feel free to drop the comment as we go. And if you're watching this as pre-recording later, do the same thing. We will read those and it helps us also to understand and how to shape the future sessions to ensure that we deliver the maximum value. When retailers come to us, they usually in one of the three phases with the private label. Either they are seriously considering launching it within the next 12 to 18 months, or they are one of the 3 years or potentially kind of feeling still the pressure of this private label that's new, and it's currently adding more pressure on the existing operations and potentially might not even be performing as well as they would hope. Or they've been already running for a longer time and still feeling heavier than it should really be. So the private label initiative initially was really great on paper and it sounded fantastic, but now that they are in it, it is disrupting their day-to-day operation. It is eating their bottom line profitability and from EBITDA. That makes is exactly why this conversation matters, because regardless of where you are starting or if the reality is really the same, the private label success, and I'm going to pause because as people are coming in and welcome them as well. Evolve, nice to meet you. Welcome. Let me know if you can hear us. Um, okay, we'll give her just a few more minutes to connect. Evolve, can you hear us? All right, maybe there's a little bit of technical difficulty. So if you are not able to respond or hear, please do try to log off and log back in so that I would love for you to be part of this conversation as well. But welcome. Then now that we are really thinking about that mix is really exactly why we're having this conversation, right? Because you could be at very different stages of building your private label, but the pressure is there and pressure is real. And because regardless of where you are, whether you're starting up or really already in this kind of in their motion mode, we are able to see there are different pressure points that could have been addressed at the beginning phase when you actually were starting up the envisioning what the private label program would be all about. And label success or failure is usually decided along before the first production order even goes out. I mean, just think about it, that typically when we are really creating this program, there's so much needs to happen between the planning phase and the conceptualizing of what that private label is, and really data analysis of your day-to-day business to understand where this private label program actually falls into and how to integrate it seamlessly. Evolve, can you hear us now? I could see that you've rejoined. I'd love to see if you're able to speak.
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Yay, I'm excited. Would you like to give us quickly introduction of yourself so that everyone also who is alive or will watch and know exactly who you are? Welcome
Yes,
to
definitely.
the team.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, so my name is Devonte Jones. I'm the founder of Evolve Nordic. And at Evolve Nordic, we create neo-luxury fashion technology. And so basically what the sectors, the categories that we have are we have smart bags. And these are the world's number one, the first ever smart bags, I promise you. And then we create heated clothing. Actually what I'm wearing right now is a heated blanket that we can turn into a shawl. So I can wrap it around me, I can zip it up, and now it's kind of like a cape
Oh,
around me with
wow,
heated
that's
bags inside of it.
incredible.
And so we can adjust the temperature from here if we need to, or we can just turn it off and it just be a cape around me. So
Wow, well, how interesting. This is a phenomenal product. So super excited to hear more about it as we
thank
go
you.
through. And what have you worked with private label before? Kind of interested in going into that route, partnering with some retailers and bringing your product under private label?
We have not worked with private label yet. We are looking at going at that route. So yes.
Oh, well, exciting. Well, welcome to our discussion. I will be pausing and also getting you a chance to get interacted with what we are actually discussing. But let's move on. And as people are trickling in, I will be pausing and introducing them as well.
Okay.
So, as what we've discussed, to kind of go back a little bit about being, because of its readiness, right, of the private label is really what's going to define the success of your program long term. Private label success or failure usually decides long time right before the production starts, before even your first order starts. It starts at the end-to-end process of understanding of what exactly you're going to be producing under private label, as well as what systems you will need, what processes you will need to put in place, and how do you seamlessly integrate that into day-to-day operations so it does not erode your bottom line profitability on operational side. It's not always about the margins, and that's where we see a big pitfall of people who are coming into us with requests for private label that always want to focus on product margin and increasing that product margin, but they are not necessarily thinking about all the different important things that we have to consider in order to make this successful. And here the part that people really don't like to admit. Private label really doesn't usually just blow up. It doesn't fail dramatically either. It's something that fails quietly through a decision that seems fine at that time, but stacked up into margin pressure, inventory drag, and operational frequency later, right? That's what we are here to unpack, is to kind of understand where those um, pockets, the hidden pockets that are often are underlooked, that are causing these frictions and that are causing over time private label programs to fail. So that is where it's critical, and this is what we're here to unpack. But before we go any further, a quick context to anyone who is joining us for the first time. I'd like to just introduce myself. My name is Evgenia Alexandrovna Yushkova, or simply Ye, and I am a fashion and retail business consultant, and I work with small but very senior level team. And between of us, we have about over 80 years of combined experience building private label programs from ground up. What we do is very specific. We help retailers design and integrate private label inside the existing operations, merchandising, sourcing, planning, financial planning, without really forcing the business to pause, restructure, or overstretch the team. What makes our approach different from most consulting agencies is that we don't come in with just generic best practices or surface level fixes. We don't treat just the symptoms that potentially a new program can bring or expose. We go through the foundation. We start with data analysis as a foundation for your assortment logic for private label program, operating models, supply chain design, systems mapping, and we optimize what actually drives margin and cash. We'll look at it as the end-to-end solution approach, not just treating a one particular area of your program. We really sat on both sides of the table, manufacturing and the retail side. And we've built over dozens of multi-million dollar private label for large scale retailers from ground up on a lean budget. We're all about agile, we're all about lean design models, and we're important for us is to create these programs on the sustainable budget that allows retailers to grow and maximize their profitability at the bottom line. So, what brings us to the table today is really not going to be the theory, but it's really the operational points of view based on the proven success among our clients. All right, well, let's dive in. Aval, are you ready to dive in with me as well into this? Um,
I
let's get
sure am.
let's unveil some of these pockets that we were talking about earlier. And I'd love to let's really start with something that's uncomfortable for most leadership teams. Is really the revenue growth does not mean private label is really working. It usually means that it has been not stress tested yet. It looks visually on the front line that it's generating better margins. It is helping us feed the new opportunity to get more customer acquisition. Yes, it's all doing that. But is it really profitable? Is it really not affecting all of our other business on a primary business, but for the retailer, which is selling other products across different brands? And how do we not cannibalize that business when we build those private labels is also very critical to think through. And you can have sales, but you can even have like a decent margin on paper as an example, and still have a system that heading to the wrong direction. I'm curious to know if any of these tactics really happens to you guys in your organizations, or if your private labels, if you already have existing labels. So for those who are already running private label, have you ever had a season where it's technically seemed like everything worked, but it still did not feel good? So if you did, please drop your comments. I'd love to hear from you, and then we'll respond to them as the information comes in. But where among most of our clients, where we often hear is this is what majority of our clients would usually answer to us is that nothing is really technically wrong, right? It just feels harder than it should. And that is the true when it comes to really thinking about if you're just looking at the private label as margins, right? Margins look okay. Sell-through isn't terrible potentially on where you guys are going through and looking at your numbers. But inventory sits longer than expected is where one of the biggest pitfalls that we often see. Cash feels tighter because now you're investing not only in bringing in inventory from all these vendors, but you're also investing in inventory, which is way ahead of time. By the time you actually paid for everything, it's going to start to ROI and return back into your cash flow. And teams are constantly reacting. And this happens anytime we interject a new program, especially a private label program into a retailer that potentially we're not ready or fully set up to run private label and operational side. That's really doesn't mean that it's been a bad execution of it, but that's really it becomes a design decision that failed at the beginning that's finally catching up. And this is why you're feeling these pressures. Private label was originally built on probably assumptions that don't really hold anymore, right? Predictable demand, for example, or long lead times that felt safe at certain time at the beginning, but now are catching up with you. And big season buys that made sense at one point now are driving your overstock inventory and tying up your cash. Those assumptions broke, and they do typically break as you are doing more and more longer the private label you do. And most operating models potentially did not really adjust to those demands or those shifts. Or potentially you're still in a push supply chain system while you are actually, as a new private label program, should have actually thought of how to do it agile. And yes, maybe jeopardize some points of margin at the beginning, but do smaller runs, do quicker tests so that you could be able to find the right winners to which then you could safely invest in the built inventory and making sure that it actually sells through and is not tying up your cash for a really long time. And when that happens, you really don't necessarily see the failure, but what you're going to see is you're going to see the friction. Private label is not a short-term margin play. And this is also an important thing to understand, especially for retailers who are considering to do private label. It's a long strategic game that is important to be able to design correctly and make sure that the processes are supported. And if the only works when the forecasts are perfect, then it's already fragile to scale. It has to work seamlessly in operation and have all the right systems in place in order for you to scale your private label program. If you are not there yet, it's time to take a step back and see what has been missed or potentially not been addressed and solve it at the root cause. When retailers tell me that they want to build or fix private label, they almost always start with product ideas, which is absolutely normal, but it's not also the wrong, it's really it becomes a really wrong place to start. The resilience doesn't come from chasing trends. It comes from how assortment really is structured for private label. Let me ask you like a different way, for example. If you look at your total assortment today and be honest with yourself, do you know which 20% of products are actually driving the most of your sales, driving 80% of your sales as an example? Almost every retail business follows some version of 80/20 rule. A small part of that assortment carries the business. And private label should never be complete without that core. It should be built from it. This is where a lot of programs go wrong. Instead of using proven winners as the foundation, private label is really treated like a parallel fashion assortment. And that's how risk sneaks in. Strong private label programs do the opposite. They reverse engineer from what already works. They use good, better, and best structure not to cannibalize the brands that they're already selling, but to deliver more value at each price tier without breaking existing relationships. And this is a really critical point to understand. How do we identify what we're going to focus on private label and at the same time consistently keep the business that's already working from those vendors who are driving 80% of your business without cannibalizing it as well? Private labels should make your best categories stronger. They shouldn't be adding more noise or making your assortment even bigger. It's all about strengthening your existing assortment that drives majority of your business. And this is what's important to build the private label on. So when we think about this in context, now how does that also apply with the supply chain and the risk management, right? This is where a lot of well-intentioned programs get into trouble. Supply chain, supply chain, supply chain. You often hear from me to talk about this, and supply chain, to have a successful private label program, supply chain is everything. And we tend to always try to get you to diversify your supply chain when it comes to private label so that it's built on a hybrid model where for testings, you could quickly get and pivot from an agile supply chain. Anytime you can do anything on demand, whether it's a print on demand or produce on demand, or at least produce or do short runs where you could be able to quickly replenish. This is the way to start any private label program successfully. And then have partners who can be able to then quickly, you could pivot to them on the winners and the winning styles. You can pivot into a more bulk buys, and that's when your margin starts to grow. But what we really want to focus is on the blended margin between the initial testings, risk-free, and the inventory that we invest in at the higher margins to ensure that the blended margin is then excels to what we would be buying it if we would be buying it from a brand. That's the formula, and that is the winning formula when we are building a successful private label brands. Private label brands get sold as really the margin opportunities when we are starting to envision what the private label would be is and start having those early conversations within a retail space or a retailer to see why would be this program even important, why we would want to consider it. What doesn't really get talked enough about though is the cash risk that's tied to the bulk season buys and the in unproven products. What also the cash risk that ties in with potentially needing to redesign your end-to-end process so that you can seamlessly integrate your private label operations within your existing ecosystems. Potentially the cash risk that would or cash commitment that would needs to be also set aside when we are scoping the private label is to ensure that we have the right systems in place in order for us to have the foundation from which we can grow. Evelyn, I know that you are, in this kind of new starting side on building this really cool and innovative process. How are you guys going around your supply chain? And is your product built on the way where you would have to do a big commitment? Or are you guys able to provide an agile supply chain where people can be able to test and quickly pivot as their early reads and demands are to be able to have a more of a safer test to integrate your product in the private label programs? Did I last you? All right, I'll give him a few minutes. Maybe he's us the technical issues. Sometimes it happens. So, well, if you get back, then please do let me know what you think about this so that we can have a discussion on that. But this is what I hear all the time from our clients or who are when they are just starting up to working with us, is where they tell us that we need really margin from day one. And I get it. I mean, we all want to start getting increasing our margins and we want to show the success of the private label programs quickly and show it in the uplift in our margins. But chasing high margin up front often leads to the lowest blended margin long term because inventory gets stuck and markdowns wipe it out. Resilient programs don't start by scaling. They really start by testing. First, they test small runs, lean designs, and thinking about the tiered pricing by phases. So your phase one, the testing phase, might actually be a comparable margin as you would be buying it from a third party. But once you prove your demand, then that's when you start to scale your winners. And the goal isn't to be about the highest margin for the first PO. It's the highest blended margin over time while keeping the cash moving. So having those abilities of doing module production and finding suppliers who could be able to support you on that sense is the key of any good, successful private label program. So if you're currently not doing this today, this is definitely something that we want to consider and that we want to find and figure it out how to do. One of the greatest example is one of our partners, Patchwork. where they're actually bringing a solution to where they can integrate into your sales demand and be able to predict based on 1 or 2 week turns of your demand and be able to manufacture product, cut and sew product, as little as 25 pieces if needed in terms of and turn it around from the time you place a PO to the time it gets to your customer within less than 4 weeks. Just think about the game changer of taking that ability of supply chain and integrating that in your private label. And if you are listening into this call and you're not in private label and you're just a manufacturing brand who is out there also doing it to D2C sales and B2B sales, this is something also to stop back to stop and think about. This is also relevant to you. Supply chain is everything. Agile supply chain is the answer to success of any of this type of programs. The ability to test quickly and produce to demand and be able to find those nuggets and winners in order for you to be able to then invest in a bigger bulk buys with risk free because you know the sell through rates, you know how quickly they're going to move, and you can predict that demand better versus trying it out of all the new styles, bringing in these large inventories, and then at the end of the day sitting on them. Yes, you made bigger, better margin, but if you're gonna have to mark them down towards the end, is it gonna actually help your business or hurt your business? And this is when we start talking about the good, better, and best assortment strategy as well. Private label should never be over assorted. Private label really needs to focus on whatever that core is. And we always say, try to reverse engineer it. It's not just you cutting out the middleman and trying to get product at better pricing so that you have a better margin. Your job is to actually reverse engineer this product in the way that will drive maximum value to your customer. I'll give you a really good example from one of our clients that we've done it with. When we identified several suppliers of one of their hooded products, as an example, and we analyzed it, what we realized that the our end consumer could really benefit if we would create a private label hooded product as well, but that has a better fit, especially when it comes to the larger sizes. What we've noticed that our retail brands actually were very true to size when between size small and extra large. But as they were starting to scale up in sizing, their grades started to become narrower and narrower, which our plus size customer would always constantly complain that the product doesn't fit them well. Well, this is where it was a great way for us to invest that product under the private label, reverse engineer, and actually create a fit that works really well, not just for regular sizing, but as well as for plus size, and be able to really deliver the value to the consumer, which they now preferred our product even over the retail product partner. But yet we were able to still figure it out how to keep both of the programs alive and be able to identify which target audience can truly benefit from the private label while not cannibalizing the regular sizing business of our retail partners. So this is a really good example of how you can start to reverse engineer and figuring it out where the focus is of your private label. Now, the other thing is you have to think about is the scalability of your assortment. It's not about doing many styles and many colors and many options in your private label program. It's really about identifying the key and being able to recreate more value and some of a little bit of a newness, but yet still staying to your core. Your private label really needs to be known by your customer for a very specific thing, whether it's fit, whether it's quality, whether it's super soft fabrics that you're going to be using. You got to find your niche, right? And but that niche needs to be really truly drives the maximum value to your customers. So now that we are kind of thinking through about what our assortment from the private label side needs to look like, and how we arrived to what we would need to be producing under private label, and how do we pair that up with the supply chain and agile supply chain, we have to now think about the operations itself. This is the part where the most really everyone underestimates on the retail side. Private label doesn't just add the opportunity, it also adds huge operational load. And not every retailer is ready for it or set up for it. So before you're starting to adapt the idea of that you're going to create a private label, it's important to step back and analyze your end-to-end existing process to understand whether it's already first optimized and optimal, and then how and at which places you would need to be able to disrupt it to integrate the needs of the systems and operations in order to be able to handle the private label. Because as a retailer at this point, you didn't need to do design. You didn't need to have a product life management system to be able to ideate the new style numbers and track your fabrics and raw materials and create bill of materials. You didn't need to do any of that stuff. Right now, you are probably running on the ERP system that allows you to encode the styles, place the PO, send it to the vendor, and then from there, you track the receiving and managing your costs. But when we start to talk about private label, now we have to think about as a manufacturers. Even if you're not manufacturing yourself, meaning you are actually subcontracting other factories, there's still a layer of complexity of providing the right information to those manufacturers. We need tech packs, right? Now we need technical team as well. We need a team that can fit this product. We also need the team who will envision and design this product. We need a system that will hold all of this information and seamlessly pass it on to the vendor, to manufacturing vendor partner, so that they could be able to pick it up, give you the protos. You could be able to communicate back and forth your feedback on the fits and protos until you get to that perfect production sample. And then you'll need to create big level materials and then be able to track and see how it affects your costing, whether you do a bulk scenario versus if you're doing a test runs with your agile supply chain. And only then that passes on to the information into your ERP system and into your PIM or PIM systems to be able to also then get that product actually ordered and have the great, and then later on live on your websites or in your stores, and so forth. But this new piece, the product life management side, is most likely currently does not exist in if you're in your traditional retailer space. So, and all that setup and implementations also come with the cost, come with the cost of investment from the systems and implementation, but also come with the cost of the operation and complexity. And you need to now build new teams who will be able to own it and handle it. It's no longer just the buying team that now owns the private label piece. It could be potentially an extension of that buying and merchandising team. Or you might want to decide that this is going to be a completely team altogether on a separate that works really tightly with the buying team as well as with the merchandising team. The other biggest pitfall that we often see is the ownership of private label. To identify who really owns it. When you often ask our retailers, well, who owns your private label? We get answers, well, the sourcing team that owns this piece, the buying team owns this piece, the designing team owns this piece, and marketing teams ensures that make sure that this product sells. But once you start connecting the dots, it's all kind of worked in the silos and it creates friction. And now the buyers are not really excited to really buy your private label program, or even though it's your house program, because now it's disrupts to everything else that they're doing with their outside vendors. And how do they now have to position their conversations with the vendors when they are asked or challenged? Well, now you're doing your private label. Well, what does that mean to my business with you, right, as a retailer? And how is that going to affect? So, finding the right solution, how that's going to get seamlessly integrated, is also critically important. And finding who's actually going to have one source of ownership that then works collaboratively with all those groups to ensure that it actually works successfully, which that puts us to that end-to-end process to understand at what point we need to start interjecting it and at what point we start to integrating it and at what point it becomes then the information that's needed for the buyers to make successful buys. The other thing we have to often think about is the timelines. As a retailer, we often, work on a much closer uh, buying timelines because we don't see the manufacturing aspect behind the scenes. What we care about as buyers and merchants is to place the order in time so that the factory will be able to manufacture and produce and get the product in time. When we start to work private label aspect of it, we now have to, as buyers, consider the much earlier cycle because when we start after forecasting what the trends and colors going to look like, what our seasonal buys should look like in terms of how much portion is going to be allocated toward private label and which product the private label actually covers, will so that we can do our seasonal buys of our vendors on top of it as an icing on the cake. I always say if you have a private label program, that should become long term your bread and butter of your business, while everything else just lays on top as a icing on the cake that you could be able to actually really create a beautiful, amazing assortment and bring maximum value to your customer. But private label can never be everything. It can only be certain things that is really essentially your core and that drives that 80% of your business so that you could be able to find a ways to be able to make it even more profitable program, right? More profitable product that drives better ROIs. But you got to factor in all those different upfront costs in investments that you need to put in operationally and system wise in order for this to be successfully done. At the leadership side, we often see that the private label ideas that get sold, but without really detailed analysis of how much it's actually going to cost to disrupt and integrate that into your day-to-day operations. This is why even if we started off the gate well, it starts to catch up and we find those frictions usually a year, 2, 3 years into it. And it's much difficult then to start redesigning all those processes than if you would have thought of it ahead of time and actually designed for success and knew exactly at what point that break-even point is going to happen and what point you actually start into ROI for your private label program. So you can make a decision whether this is the right move for you at this right time. For those who are really already writing a private label, I would love to also position a question. And I'm starting to see that some things are trickling in. So thank you guys for answering, but I'd love to see more discussion so that we could have more meaningful dialogues. But did your system feel ready when you started the private label? I'm curious to know. Or did you end up really patching things together as you went on? Majority of our clients, when we start to really dissect and do this analysis, we do find out that most of those private labels programs were built on this patchwork system. Is that, well, we started, we kind of, dedicated X amount of SKUs to it. We ran into this, and then we start to figure out what systems we need. And then we start to implement, well, we need a system here, we need a system there. And of course, it disrupts your full operations. And people become resistant because now you're making their job more harder. It was already difficult to keep up all your day-to-day business, but now they also have to have this, I call it stepchild often, right? Because that's how it often is treated as a side project instead of actually being a strategic program that is integrates and becomes a better bread and butter for your business, for your retail business. And what usually happens is when leadership gets excited about the upside of the private label, the decisions gets made, and only later do the teams realize the systems aren't built for the manufacturing. For example, no PLM, or you don't have the product life management system, or your ERP has such limitations, not only limitations to be able to seamlessly integrate with the PLM system, but at the same time, it has limitations of what actually it can track and how it passes on the information to the next step. Because your ERP system initially either was homegrown or you implemented had very different needs than what it is once you start layering the private label. So what our team does is first assesses all your systems and ensures that you have those capabilities And if you don't have those capabilities that you would need in order to integrate with all these other new systems that we would need to bring in on board to make it successful, then what would the tech stack has to look like and what the financial commitment would need to be so that you can layer that in into your analysis of whether this private label program is really for you or not. That's where we becoming start saving money for our retailers and also able to execute it long term on the lean budgets because we pre-think those things ahead of time. And that's what's super critical. And I'm hoping that this is going to spark up some ideas if you are just thinking of doing private label. And if you are already doing it, potentially allows you to take a step back and really be honest with yourself. Was this analysis ever been done? And or should it be done now so that you could be able to optimize it and have a much successful path forward as you continue to grow your private label. The other things to think about is the supply chain partners and how strong they truly are, right? And if you're still on that push inventory mindset, which many retailers are, how can you then integrate the pull supply chain methodology into your push and create a hybrid model so that it could support your private label initiatives in a successful way? Private label doesn't really create the gaps, but what the private label does, it exposes them. And if that exposure isn't addressed early, private label becomes an EBITDA draining instead of the margin engine. And this is where it's really critical to understand how important to do all of this pre-work ahead of time before you're committing to actually adapt and start moving and dedicate budget towards the private label program so that you are not then cut off guard. And a year later, you realize that this is not something that you can even sustain. And you end up outsourcing it to potentially often the same retailer brand that you already carried, which then often then jeopardizes your private label success altogether because of course the retail partner, their retail brand partner, their biggest push is to sell you their product, not the private label. And then that's when you start to find all those different reasons and excuses of why this potential not going to work. And you slowly start to go gravitate and continuously buy product from your retail partner vendor versus actually putting more focus on your private label and start driving your margins up. All right. Well, let's kind of land this properly based on everything that we have discussed. If there's one thing I want you to walk away with today, is that private label works, but only when it's treated as a long strategic system and not a short-term margin play. When private label is built on real assortment data, what actually sells season over season, it reduces the risk. When it's structured around scalable categories instead of trends, it grows without breaking. And when it paired with an agile supply chain and staged but in a way where the buyers understand that this is your core program and this is your bread and butter and everything else really just needs to be then complementary to that and give you the next layers, it protects the cash instead of tying it up. And because it gives you the ability to do those quick tests without committing to large sum inventories. Yes, potentially you might be not making as much margin as you would hope, and you're giving up those margin points for the ability to turn your inventory faster until you have those proven styles that you can then invest in bulk, and that's when you start to see your margins go up. And when the operational foundation is designed intentionally, system ownerships, processes, private label integrates into business instead of disrupting it. That's the difference between private label as a margin engine and a private label as EBITDA draining disruption. Today wasn't about really tactics, right? It was about how private label actually behaves inside real retail business. and why so many programs struggle, not because of effort, but because of early design decisions or a lack of actually designing that end-to-end process and analysis before adopting the private label altogether. And if you're considering private label today, this should help you to avoid expensive mistakes. If you are early into it, it should help you to recognize what's fixable now. And if you are really more established, this I hope this should have given you a clear lens of where the pressure is really coming from. All right. Well, let's slow down and really take a moment to kind of bring everything together. And what we've done today is really not solve the private label problems, but to reveal them of where they most likely are hiding and why you're feeling that pressure. What we've done is really diagnosis of why private label pressure shows up in the way that they do, which is quietly, gradually, and usually later than people expected. We talked about why private label is long, strategic game, why assortment structure matters more than individual products, and why supply chain, cash, and system designs either protect margin or slowly eroding it. None of this is really theoretical. This is absolutely real, practical things that are happening and what we're seeing consistently among all of our clients. This is the same patterns we see over and over when we bring them in. And we usually, when the teams are already feeling the pressure, sadly, not we often get to already treat and find the root causes of already failing private label programs. And we try to reverse engineer them so that we can make them more successful. But when we do get clients who are coming in for us from the very beginning, we do see a huge uplift in how much we can actually create with the smaller budget without actually wasting on later on rework and do it right from the first step. If you're ever going to be curious or want to kind of have more dialogue about your private label initiative, there's going to be a link right now in with our calendar. So feel free to book it. We would love to speak with you about this as well. But I'd love us to think about that this is really a stepping stone to our topic that we're going to be discussing in our live webinar on January 22nd at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We do this, we have a roundtable every Tuesday, every first Tuesday of the month at 11:30. And then we have our following a live webinar that helps us to go and dive deeper into actual solutions of all these problems or challenges that we just exposed. In the live webinar that's coming up in January, we're going to be talking about the assortment architecture for margin lift, how profit is really designed and not negotiated. It builds directly on this conversation that we just had. If today was the about understanding why margin pressure shows up, the webinar that we're hosting on January 22nd is about where margins is actually designed into the business inside the assortment. So if you're curious, and please do register, there is a link below that would be able to register to, and I'd love to see you guys all on that webinar as well. And we'll go deeper into things where we intentionally didn't have time to do and include today. We're going to talk about how white space mapping actually works at the economic level, why most assortments are crowded where risks are high, and how SKU roles, not SKU count, really drive the margin durability, and how assortment structure creates vendor leverage without relying on negotiations. This is the execution level work that we are delivering in those live webinars. Not an inspiration, really. It's not about the trends. It's not about the product brainstorming. It's really about the leaders who already know private label fundamentals and want to make it perform under pressure. And if you are not doing private label, but have a retail brand or a brand that you're manufacturing your own product, this is very applicable and relevant. So feel free to join because you will find a lot of great strategies that will apply to you as well. If you're considering private label, our upcoming webinar will really help you guys. I really hope to see all of you guys register and be able to join us on that great topic of discussion. And private really label is not a trend. And I want us to leave with that it's not about a cool thing to do or a creating this side project that can potentially turn into a good uplift of your margin. It's really about strategic capabilities and be able to then long-term drive your customer acquisition. That's what it's really all about, so that you can own that customer because you're committing them to the brand that they love, your brand, your private label brand, so that you can create the following and that you could be able to then make this customer yours for life, irregardless what changes in the market and shifts of your retail partners. And when it's designed correctly, it becomes one of the most strongest assets in the retail business. It helps you to really create that loyalty of your customer and keep them for life if you continue doing a right and consistent job of your private label. And let it really lets them to remind you that the private label doesn't fail because teams don't work hard enough. It struggles when it's built without the economic intent and without the understanding of the existing processes and what will need to happen and change in terms of processes and systems in order for you to integrate that seamlessly into your day-to-day operations. Today was really about recognizing that early. And I hope that this roundtable sparks up ideas of designing private label differently before pressure turns into damage. If you were left after listening to this recording or after watching us live right now, please, I'd love to hear your comments. Please let us know. Share, like this content as well so that we know that this is delivering you value and we will continue doing more of. If you have a very specific topic that you would love us to discuss throughout this year, please let us know. Again, we read every comment that is been shared with us. And thank you for spending this time with us. I know you could be doing all these different things, but you chose to be here. And I believe that this drives value to you. And I'm really grateful for you to be joining us as well. And whether you were here live or watching this later, this is exactly the level where the private label decisions need to be made. We'll continue the conversation in our live webinar on January 22nd at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I want to thank everyone once again and Happy New Year's. And let's have a strong year together of continuous growth and continuous improvement across assortments, operations, systems, so that we could be able to cut out the waste, find profit leaks, and maximize your profitability together hand in hand. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate for you to be here.
Before you leave, before you leave, uh, yes. So I would like to speak to you. Um,
Yes, yes, yes,
this is
yes.
not this is not my first time on this call. I've been on here in the past, I think a few years ago, and actually, um, it was extremely good because I ended up making some very good friends from the last few ones that I was a part of. Um, but this is more or less towards you,
Okay.
because you said you're a fashion consultant,
Yeah.
and you do these things. Yes. So I was wondering if there would be a way that you and I could get on a call, where I could speak deeper personally with you yourself.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So we'll send you a link to to my calendar. Feel free
Okay.
to book it. It's absolutely free. And then we will dive into exactly specifically what you're trying to solve, and let's see what we can come up with as the next steps for you.
Definitely. I will look forward to that, and we will book it as soon as possible.
That would be perfect. And thank you for joining and supporting
Thank you.
us on this roundtables and live webinars. And it's really good to hear when people keep coming back. That means we're doing something right. So this
Exactly.
is our mission is to share the wealth of knowledge and learn from one another. Because if we don't stay together, we cannot win this especially as we are getting into more and more challenging times with every year.
That is